Thank you. Speaking of rings and such, someone did leave a ring, a really nice one, and part of an earring last Saturday. So if you're missing a ring or an earring, let me know. Otherwise, it's going to be added to my collection. All right, we have some gifts to be handed out. Steve and Michael, would you be willing to help assist with this? On the front, underneath the chairs, are some cups, and if you could pass one out to each person, that would be wonderful. Do not partake of the contents at this time. That will come later. For those of you who have missed our series, we're in our third week. We have one more next week. And we have been doing a series on breathing and putting margins and buffers in our lives around the important areas of our lives, things, people, choices that we make so we can have more room to breathe and truly experience life lived at a deeper level. And we've been looking particularly at the ancient practice of Sabbath. Sabbath is a Hebrew word for rest, for ceasing, for stopping. And so we're saying, how do we incorporate these principles into our everyday rhythms of life so that when God, He set them out as foundational to our living, Sabbath was foundational to living an abundant life, how do we go back to that and incorporate that into our normal rhythms of every day, of every week? Well, the premise we've been talking about right from the beginning, we talked about it's important to be aware. First of all, we have to be aware that we're stressed. I don't think that's too difficult. When we're pressed in our lives, there's a whole bunch of times I imagine we say, oh, if only we could stop, if only we could rest a little. If only I wouldn't keep pressing in this direction, whether it's a habit in your life or choices that need to be kind of put some margins around a different direction. And so awareness is the first thing. And then taking that awareness to God, what do you want me to do with it? One of the foundational boundaries in learning how to breathe more deeply, more space to breathe with God, is learning how to say no, resisting the urge to continue. That's what we talked about last week, resisting the urge to continue. And this week we're talking about how miracles are found in the moments that we give to God. You will find miracles in the moments that you give to God. When we take a moment, when we carve out space as God encourages us, it will open the way for miracles. So the question is, what is a miracle? We talk about it, we read about it in the Bible. What's a definition of a miracle? You know that word, you keep saying it over and over, it starts to sound funny. Miracle. I'm sorry, it just caught me. Miracle. What is it? Surprising, unexpected, beyond man's understanding, comprehension. The what? Faith. Ooh, I like that. Faith is a miracle. Ooh, I like that. Every time we have faith, that's a miracle. It takes faith. Someone said something over here? All right. The unbelievable. That's often, the unbelievable things that happen. They're like, there's no other way this could be but God. Have you ever wondered if Jesus were here today and He did some of the miracles that He did back then, how would the response be to those miracles? Well, someone thought about that a little bit more and decided to do a candid camera kind of show on that. And so I was watching this on YouTube and I thought, well, you know what? If we're looking about definitions, let's look at what happens when a miracle is in a modern day setting. So let's take a look at this video right now. All right, so there's this wonderful clip of this man who dresses up like Jesus. And he goes, and what they do is they set up a candid camera. So they have this little girl with a box in the park, and she opens it up, and you see that there's a dead mouse in there. And so she closes it, and she takes a shovel, and she's starting to dig in the dirt, like she's going to bury her dead mouse. And so she calls over a stranger to come over, and she shows him the dead mouse and asks if he will help her dig the grave for her mouse. And so he starts digging, and then they have a stranger that comes along and asks for directions. So he steps aside to get the help her along the way. In the meantime, the little girl swishes out the box, and has a live mouse in there. And so she has the same box, and it looks like the same box. And so she's standing there still looking sad. And so then this guy dressed up like Jesus comes along. And so the guy's digging this grave for this mouse, and he comes over, and the guy's looking at him because he's like looking at Jesus. And so Jesus comes over, and he puts his hand on the box to bless it, to raise the dead. And the guy's like freaking out. You can look at this, and he's like, what are you doing to this poor little girl? You're going to give her trauma. And he can't believe someone's doing this. And so then the girl opens the box, and this live mouse comes out. And so he's, you see the guy look, and he's looking, and Jesus, just keeps walking, praises God. And so they do this candid camera routine for several different people. And go to YouTube, go to Jesus' Miracles 2014, and you'll see it. But anyway, that's when I think of it. They eventually show them, by the way, that it was all a joke. But in the old days, in the Bible times, it wasn't a joke. And I imagine, though, people probably gave the same strange looks. And when the miracles happen today, it can still be pretty unbelievable, depending on what your definition of a miracle is. And I would like to, this morning, expand the definition just a tad bit. I think we'll be in good company. Albert Einstein is the one that said there are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. Pretty cool, huh? So it's a matter of perspective. A matter of perspective, perhaps an opportunity to open up to possibilities that hadn't been seen before. So the definition I want to use this morning is, I like the author Priscilla Shirer, who wrote, a miracle is when God suspends the regular way that the universe functions to interject his activity. Let me say that again. It's when God suspends the regular way that the universe functions to interject his activity. So the question is, how does the normal way that the universe functions in our work, in our relationships, in dealing with difficult situations in life, how does our culture normally function? And we've been discussing in the past couple of weeks, when something gets difficult, when it's hard, when we're pressed and stressed, we often try to work harder. That's a natural instinct. Well, then we need to work harder. We need to put more out there. We need to go. We can't stop. We need to do what feels right in the moment, whether we're eating or working or struggling with temptation or doing things our way. We so often, the way the normal functioning of the universe goes, we don't often resist the urge to continue, which leaves us in a heap of exhaustion, either physically or spiritually. That's the regular way the universe operates. So a miracle would be when God finds ways to help us do the opposite of what we normally would do in the rhythms of our life. When God breaks through in us and through us with unexpected energy, when we actually find the strength to stop, pause, reflect before acting, when we find ourselves thinking clearly for once, when we have creative ideas coming from who knows where, when we exhibit skills in our lives that we didn't even know we had, and we actually use those to give to others, unnatural occurrences in this world, unnatural occurrences that can be accredited to the divine. I believe that when we, with God's strength, find ways to incorporate Sabbath-type margins, rest, and moments of pausing, places of stopping, when we carve out space in our lives, in our schedules, in our hearts, in our minds, space for God to be God, miracles will happen in our life. There will be occurrences that are opposite of the way that we would normally act and function and operate. Miracles of renewal, miracles of peace in the midst of chaos, of abundance, of freer living inside and out. God says that I know the plans I have for you, to give you a hope, a plan of future. I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. And he says, I do not send my word out only for it to return empty to me. If I say these things, I will make them happen in your life and in your world, despite how the universe normally functions. I believe that divine delight awaits in the spaces that we open with and for God. There's history on this. We've been talking about the Israelites and their journey through the desert. They were slaves for hundreds of years, and God rescued them, took them out to the sandy dunes of the desert, and decided to reorient them, recreate their lives to go from a slavery mentality to a free people, so they could learn what it means to live abundant lives. Well, they needed food. We talked about the manna. There was nothing around, so God gave them the heavenly Krispy Kreme donuts. Heaven gave manna. It says it was a unique wafer-like cookie made with honey. It would come every morning, and they would go out and collect it, and by evening, the manna that was still on the ground that they hadn't collected would melt away. It says, though, in Exodus 16, it says that the person, when they went out and gathered, the person who gathered a lot had no surplus, and the person who gathered a little had no shortage. A little miracle happening there. God made everyone's portion just right for their needs. Now, part of God's training plan, I believe, was reorienting themselves to realizing they didn't have to keep working every single day. And so God set up this manna plan, and he said, that's great, you have 6 days you're going to work, but on the 7th day, you're not to go out and collect and gather anything. 6 days work, you have to take a break, rest, starting to get a rhythm going, a rhythm of work and rest. And so they were able to catch their breath, learn that life is more than just work. So on the 6th day, they went out to gather like usual. They spent the same amount of time apparently gathering their manna. They went in, and I guess they divvied it up or something, because at some point they realized, wait a minute, something's a little weird here. Usually when we gather for this amount of time, we get 2 quarts of manna for each person. Now there's 4 quarts of manna for each person. And so it says that the leaders went to Moses to report this and said, what the heck, what's going on? And Moses turns to him, and the Message Bible translates, he says, well, this is what God was talking about. You take a break, you do what he asked you to do, he's going to provide for you what you need. And it's interesting that usually, which we're going to touch on in a little bit, usually at the end of the day, it would melt away. Anything that was held onto, left over, would rot. But on the 6th day over the Sabbath, none of the manna would rot, so that they could eat it and have their supply. Key principle is here. When they spent the same amount of time, when they followed God's leadings in their life, for taking breaks, for incorporating Sabbath rhythm in their life, God provided, not just provided, but he doubled their return. Same amount of work, they produced twice as much as they normally did. Now, it would be understandable if they did double the amount of work, they should get double the amount of manna. But in this case, it was the same amount of time for double the results. When they followed his plan, when they built in the margins, when they carved out time to rest and renew, their needs were provided for. And when you think about our lives and how stressed and pressed, and all we can think of is we got to work. We got to press. This is what I want in my life. I crave it. I desire it. I'm just going to keep going for it. And God's like, need some space around that. Need some margins. I promise you, you step into that margin with me, I will provide the life you need. I believe God was teaching them the truth about the kind of God, a generous God that he is, and what he's capable of doing in our lives when we give his ways a try, the way of rest, of setting rhythms between work and play, boundaries and margins around our choices and habits that will allow for freer, less chaotic, and destructive ways of living. Walter Brueggemann, who's an Old Testament scholar, writes that the gifts of life are indeed given by a generous God. It's a wonder, it's a miracle, it's an embarrassment, it's irrational, but God's abundance transcends the market economy. Transcends the market economy. His gifts to us do not make sense. His provision in our lives, especially when we trust him with our schedules, with our relationships, with our struggles, our temptations, they don't make sense when he provides the way through it. But that's the definition of a miracle, the unbelievable. Well, there's research that kind of backs up that God actually not only put this out there, this is a rhythm that we need to follow, but he created human beings to be little miracle-making machines and how to live the best, most productive life. To be most productive in our lives, most effective in our lives, start by relaxing. And I want to share a little bit of research. I'm a person that likes to know what the research is behind things, how it makes sense. And there's a guy by the name of Tony Schwartz. He's a CEO of the Energy Project, and he's an author as well. And he wrote about some of that research on productivity for the New York Times. And because of the pace that we live at, which is accelerating clearly every day, it's an unsustainable pace. There is this growing body of research from different kinds of disciplines that looks and has been finding that strategic renewal, intentionally building in space for rest, relaxation, and recharging. Strategic renewal boosts productivity, job performance, and overall health. So a mindset of our current market economy is more, bigger, faster. And we've been that way since the Industrial Revolution, right? We just keep pressing. But the reality is that our resources, our time, our energy are limited. We don't have finite resources, but we work as if we do. We want to give, something's a difficult situation, we want to throw everything into it. And so we only have 24 hours though, right? That's if you don't sleep, which I know some people that do that. If they're working on something, they just forget sleep and work for 24 hours and then they crash. Well, our energy is limited as well. But the thing about energy is that as it goes down, it can be recharged and go back up again. So they're doing all this research on energy. Taking time off, though, when you have a deadline or when you're struggling with something is counterintuitive, right? That's not what we think about doing. It's at odds with our employers. They think downtime is wasted time. And they've done some surveys and found that at least a third of employees eat lunch at their desks so they can continue working. And more than 50% of employees assume that they're going to work during their vacations. The rewards from your boss tend to go towards those who push the hardest and continuously over time. However, the crux of the research shows that even though they may push and they're rewarded, it doesn't mean that they've actually produced more. They are not the most productive. Some of the studies, basketball players who slept 10 hours a day had their performance in practice dramatically improved. Their free throw shots, their three-point shooting, each increased an average of 10% when they got 10 hours of sleep a night. When night shift air traffic controllers were given 40 minutes to nap, and they napped an average of 19 minutes, this is the ones that control, our planes flying. They performed much better when they had naps on tests that measured vigilance and reaction time. Well, I want my air traffic controller to take a nap. The University of California found that 60 to 90 minutes of nap time, 60 to 90 minutes, improved memory tests as fully as an 8 hours worth of sleep. 60 to 90 minute nap. Power nap. Ernst & Young did an internal study and found that for each additional 10 hours of vacation that employees took, their year-end performance ratings improved by 8% by their supervisors. And when they have studied the physiology of the human body, they realize that we're not, designed to expend energy continuously. We're built to pulse between spending energy and recovering energy, spending it and recovering it. You know the research on sleep cycles, how you go through that rhythm, moving from light sleep to deep sleep and then back again to light sleep? They found that happens in 90-minute sessions. 90-minute sessions. And they found that in our waking lives, we go through those same 90-minute cycles, except we go from a state of alertness progressively to fatigue every 90 minutes. So what happens if we don't fill up again? We stay at that fatigue level. Our bodies, God designed our bodies with cycles and rhythms to tell us we need to take breaks. But so often, because of the culture I believe we live in, that is an accelerating and pressing culture, we tend to override these signals in our bodies, and instead we keep going with caffeine, with sugar. We dive into our emergency reserves and pull up our adrenaline to keep going, to keep pressing. When we're under pressure, most of us experience, rather than, hey, I'm under pressure, I'm kind of stressed here, I think I'm going to take a nap. No, we have an impulse that drives us harder, that we got to keep at it. And what happens is every time we respond in that way to that stress, every time we respond, it makes that groove in our brain a little deeper and a little stronger that says this is the normal way you're supposed to respond. This becomes a habit then of how you deal with stress. And until we break that cycle, remember the Sabbath, the principles of Sabbath in our everyday, then we're headed to a long-term fatigue, bodily, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So these researchers who found out about the cycle, they took some test subjects. They specifically took athletes and some other artists and people who have to perform, like musicians who have to perform in front of people, and others who are from different jobs that their whole career is based on performance. And they had them do their training, their practicing in those 90-minute sessions. And so they said, you're going to practice for 90 minutes, then you take a break. You renew, you recharge until you feel your energy again, then you go to another 90-minute session. And they had them only working 4.5 hours a day doing this. Yeah, right. Who wouldn't have energy at that, right? But what they found was their productivity and performance level increased and was higher, maximized more than those who had worked straight through 8 hours without breaks. Pretty amazing. Amazing. We realize that when we manage our energy intentionally, skillfully, it is possible to get more done in less time more sustainably. God designed us for this purpose. From the beginning of time, He not only designed us, but He said, remember, when you think your bodies can really keep pushing, remember the Sabbath. Remember, I laid the foundations of this world with a Sabbath incorporated into the rhythm of living. When you are feeling stressed and pressed, when you're feeling like a slave, do the opposite of what you feel you want to do. The Hebrew slaves, their rhythms of life for hundreds of years had gotten so out of whack. And so God did just that. He reminded them of something that the New York Times is going to write about thousands of years later. He says, take a break, take rest, carve out space to renew, a day a week, moments in your day so you can live free, so you can breathe, so you can live the generous and abundant lives God has intended for you. Now, what's the opposite of generosity? What's the opposite of being generous? Selfish, stingy, what's another word? Greedy, scanty, meager, impoverished, careless. You think, what? Cheater? Cheating? Yeah, you're cheating people out of whatever you could be generous with. Scrooge. Do you think of Scrooge? Okay. The opposite of generous living, of living free, is living like Scrooge in your life. Living like Scrooge with your life. Living with a scarcity mentality. Scarcity is the opposite of living free. It's when we're scared. Scarcity is scared. It's we're living miserly because we're afraid. Most things come down to fear in some form or another. Scared of not having enough, not having what you want. And so we believe that we have to hold on firmly in our hands at all times, or we will be left without work, without time, without money, without the information that we need, without the food or the clothes or the opportunity or the relationship. And so we hold on tight to whatever it is because we fear that if it gets taken away, if we don't keep holding on, we'll lose out on the life that we want. So we grasp and we hold on to the things that God intended to be enjoyed freely, intended as gifts. And in our holding on, we will miss out on the miracles, on the blessings he has waiting for us if we could just open our hands and let it go to him. Now, I passed out a gift, a little chocolate gift for each of you. I want you to take that now, and I want you to dump that chocolate into your hands. Not your mouth, your hands. Now, as you're holding this delectable chocolate, it's designed to bring delight, isn't it? That chocolate. Now, if you happen to fear that you would not have any more chocolate in your life, like tomorrow all chocolate would be wiped off the face of the earth. Did I just see you eat that? Oh my goodness, George. No, stop, resist the urge to continue. So if you were to hold on to that chocolate tight in your hand, saying, no, I do not want it to let it go. This is what I want in my life forever and ever and ever. What would happen? It would melt like the manna, right? It would melt. It would become a mess. And I see, are you licking your hands? Oh, I just don't want to scrape it up. I was thinking about wet wipes, but I didn't bring them. That's the object lesson here. Lives not lived open-handedly, not lived generously, freely, gets pretty yucky. It happened to the Hebrews. When they were learning how to live free, God gave them the gift of manna, and he said, take what you need, don't hold on to it, don't hoard it, trust me. I will take care. I will provide. So they would get this manna, and they'd watch it melt as after they gathered it, and they had to trust that that manna would come again the next day, that the chocolate wouldn't be wiped off the face of the earth. They knew manna. They trusted that manna would come the next day. Whatever they needed would be provided, but they had to stop. They had to stop working. They had to stop holding on. They had to take a breather and trust this to God. Well, some of these slaves trying to become free, they didn't really get this idea. They didn't like the idea. They were scared of this idea, and they were living in that scarcity mentality. And so instead of letting that manna go, they held on to it. They didn't try God's idea. They decided they'd rely on their own ways. They were going to be in control of their schedule, of their lives. So maybe they didn't eat as much, whatever, but the Bible says they held on to it. They had extra that they had overnight, and guess what happened? Spoiled. Very creative object lesson from a very creative God. It said maggots took over the manna, and it became sour or started to smell. Now imagine in a hot desert, smelly, rotten, maggot-infested manna in the tent next door to you. Ugh. It doesn't take much for one small thing in our house, in the refrigerator. Something goes rotten, a dead animal in the rafters, a clogged sewer pipe. Doesn't take much for the whole square footage of your house to start smelling up. And then everything is more difficult to do. It's harder to eat. It's harder to work. It's harder to play. It inhibits our ability to enjoy life. So it was an immediate alert to the Israelites. And I wonder, gosh, what if God gave that to us? Like, if we overworked, if we kept pushing past the boundaries of whatever it is that takes over in our lives, what if something started to stink around us? Wouldn't that be like a huge warning? Whoop, 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 you've overworked. You've gone too far. You should resist the urge to continue, and then it won't smell so bad. Well, the question is, we don't have that physical object lesson that God gave to the Hebrews. But I want to ask you, is there an area of your life that you're not able to enjoy fully because of something that you're holding on to that needs to be let go? Where are you overcommitted or overdoing or overcrowded? Is it inhibiting your fullness of life with God and others? I'm pretty sure, looking at my own life, probably if we each look in our lives, in those places that we're holding on when we should be letting go, it's usually because we're operating out of that scarcity mentality. Scared that if we don't keep going or doing whatever it is, that we won't have what we want, whether it's accomplishment or satisfaction or acceptance or peace or fun or joy, whatever it is. I think in those times, in those places, each of us struggles with in some area of our lives to let go to God, to say, okay, I'm going to create more margin and space for you, God, to enter and for me to give this up. I think we have to come here, come to Scripture, come gather together to encourage and remind each other the truth about who God is. It's when we can hear again and be reminded we're not alone in this struggle, in whatever it is we're trying to hold on to, that there is a way, there is a truth, there is life through Jesus Christ that allows us to open our lives, open our hands so that the miracles he has waiting to happen in our lives can come. When we take a mere glance through scriptures, we find the truth of who God is, whispering to us over and over again, truth that he's a generous God who lavishes his love and power and provision in our lives so that we can live freely and abundantly. He's a God who says, cast all your cares on me, I'll take care of you. He says, when you're at your weakest, that's when I'm at my strongest, and I'm the God that's for you, not against you. I'm able to do abundantly more than you could even ask or imagine. So follow me. Try my ways. I will give you abundant life, a life where your hands and your heart will be opened, and you'll learn it's more blessed to give than to receive, a life of generosity. And I think the life of generosity starts with being generous to yourself. God's command, only command, says everything hinges on this. You do this, you don't have to worry about anything else. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Love God. Love comes from God. Love your neighbor as yourself. You have to love yourself first to give that margin in your life, to let that love come, to be generous with your life. So then you have time, schedule, availability, a spirit open to be able to give love to others. And all of this, I think God says the same thing he did to the Hebrews back then. Trust me. You don't think it's going to work if you build margins into your life. I get that. You think if you don't continue doing what you're doing that you won't get the life you want. I'm not talking about cars or clothes or big houses. I'm talking about a life that you really want in your core soul, a life of meaning, a life of joy, a life that has peace, a life that has depth. So he says, try this. I promise I've got your back. I turn nothingness into mind-boggling universes with mere words. I can handle your world. Remember the manna. Same amount of work, double the return. That's how God rolls. It's miracles out of mere moments. I think the biggest reason that God frees us up is so that we can look up. He frees us up so we can look up. When we look up, we see God and his generosity and his love, and we worship him. In Exodus, he says, let my people go so they may come and worship me. And when we set up those margins in our lives, it's so that we can come into relationship with him. And through that relationship, then it opens the rest of our lives out in generosity. When we are freed up, we have a new perspective, we get hope, we get that energy, that wisdom, that strength, and that direction on living, how to let that generosity overflow to others. Proverbs 11, the world of the generous gets larger and larger. The world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. The one who blesses others is abundantly blessed. Those who help others are helped. I want to close with a video. Hopefully this one works. The video is a picture. You can talk and talk, but to give a picture of a family who put some space, put some margins in their lives because they wanted to be able to live generously. And take a look and see what this looks like.
So my husband is reading the Sunday paper, and he comes across an article that talks about this refugee family that had gotten their bike stolen. Their bikes were their transportation. And he says, you need to read this. The kids got up and it was craziness, and Brad talked about what a refugee family was, and then he asked the question, well, what can we do about this? My 9-year-old pipes in and says, I think we need to go get them bikes. And Brad said, you're right, that's what we should do. We should go get them bikes. And I thought, oh my gosh. I'm thinking we're gonna show up with bikes, and they probably have at least 5 or 6 bikes by now. And my kids are gonna be so disappointed, and we're going to spend our Sunday dealing with this rather than having our family day like we were going to have. We get in the car, we're all excited. We head to the store to pick out the bikes. The boys wanted to find a certain color, and we knew that they had one son, and so the boys wanted to pick out the bike for the boy. We pile the bikes in the car, and we're really excited. As we drive down the road, we realize we really don't know where we're going. My husband called the church that was affiliated with this family. They couldn't give out the address. And he is persistent and said, it looks as though this is in this part of town, is that right? And the voice on the other end said, you're right, it's in that part of town. I kept thinking, I'm sure somebody has already made sure that this family has bikes. And so there is a line of these duplex homes, and we had to figure out which home was theirs. The picture in the paper had a hose reel on the front, and sure enough, one of the kids said, there it is, there's the hose reel. And there's no one home. So we decide to wait, and a half an hour goes by, 2 hours, 3 hours, and by that time, I'm ready to leave. We've waited long enough. My husband said, let's make one more pass through the neighborhood, and then we can go home. Then the excitement starts. They're home. The little boy was telling his dad, these bikes are for us. And the only thing that the dad could say was, I like bike, I like bike. And he had the biggest smile on his face, and he's like, I like bike. I said to the boy, have you gotten a bike yet? And he said, no, ma'am. That was kind of a turning point for me. I think so often the need is so close that you miss it. Experiencing that joy when we drove away, and how my kids were saying, that was so cool, that was so cool. Did you see their faces? That was what was so meaningful to me.
That's not the way the universe normally functions unless God's involved. Miracles happen when we build margins, when we build spaces into our lives, into our schedules, into our finances, into our hearts, into our minds, because it allows space for God to be God. And whenever God is allowed to enter, generosity and joy and meaning and peace and abundant kind of living will always, always flow out from there. And to me, there's nothing more miraculous than seeing that kind of love in action in our world. And that's what we at Inspire absolutely can do as we fill up with God, as we make space to get with God, to let God be a part of our lives, take over our lives. We will help make miracles of love happen everywhere He sends us. Let's stand and pray. God, I think about the water that Dawson had fixed up so cool with our Inspire on it. And I think about how it's going to feel so good to drink some of that water after this and after we've been eating the gifts of chocolate. And I think about you as the water of life that never runs dry. Miracle that happens constantly, you in our lives. And so God, as we take a bottle and we go from here, as we drink that water, as we think about space in our lives, a space to swallow the water, the space that it has in our bodies, as we think about having your Spirit poured into us, just remind us, God, the refreshment that we feel, we can offer that to others. Hand them a bottle, yes, but an encouraging word, a helping hand, an ear that listens, a note of encouragement, a meal that's shared, helping the homeless, hosting a family, whatever you nudge us to do, God, remind us that if we step into that space with you, if we carve out that space for you, we'll be a part of miracles. Thank you. We love you. In your name, amen.